So this talk is light deflection, contradiction, or the longer version, light deflection by gravity, contradiction, Newton versus Einstein. This is Kip Thorne. He's a theoretical physicist. And Kip Thorne says, second crucial proof of the breakdown in Newtonian gravity was the relativistic bending of light. Einstein's theory predicted that starlight passing near the limb of the sun should be deflected by 1.75 seconds of arc, whereas Newton's law predicted no deflection. Observations during the 1919 eclipse of the sun in Brazil, carried out by Sir Arthur Eddington and his British colleagues, brilliantly confirmed Einstein's prediction to an accuracy of about 20%. This dealt the final death blow to Newton's law and to most other relativistic theories of gravity. However, this is Sabine Hoffansfelder, and she's also a theoretical physicist. And she says, as light carries energy and is thus subject of gravitational attraction, a ray of light passing by a massive body should be slightly bent towards it. This is so both in Newton's theory of gravity and in Einstein, but Einstein's deflection is by a factor 2 larger than Newton's. And further on she says, as history has it, Eddington's original data actually wasn't good enough to make that claim with certainty. His measurements had huge error bars due to bad weather, and he also might have cherry-picked his data because he liked Einstein's theory a little too much. Shame on him. And supposedly later tests showed light bending was twice Newton's. Anyway, picking up on just the bits they're saying, these bits they're saying, Kip Thorne says Newton's law predicted no deflection, by which he must mean Newtonian physics. So he's saying that Newtonian physics predicted no bending of light by gravity, while Hoffansfelder says Newtonian physics gives light deflection. So they seem to be contradicting each other. As a side issue, could say what Kip Thorne is referring to Newton's law, by which he means law of gravity presumably, and that is different to what Hoffansfelder refers to as Newton's theory of gravity, but that is just playing word games. I don't see any definition of them being different. Newton's law of gravity is Newton's theory of gravity, as far as I'm concerned, some taking them to mean the same thing. But the proviso is, of course, that physicists have this horrible habit of playing word games and changing definitions of terms, i.e. what they do a lot of time is move goalposts, and playing their word games is one way they do move the goalposts. And I'll give an explanation of what moving goalposts means, and it refers to a goal-based sport where the criterion, i.e. the goal of a process competition, while still in the process, gets moved. That sort of same thing happens in theories. When theorists start dealing with theories, they start moving the goalposts. Anyway, taking it as Thorne is saying it's no deflection of light in Newtonian physics, and Hoffansfelder is saying there is, that is a contradiction. So we need to look a bit more into details about that. The Einstein online site tells us the pioneer of a mathematical description of gravity, Sir Isaac Newton, apparently wrote nothing about the effect of mass on the path of light rays, other than to note at the end of his book Optics that light particles should be affected by gravity in the same way as is ordinary matter. So Newton seems to be predicting bending of light by gravity, but really you could also look at another way. He's speculating that light should bend gravity, so it's not a definitive prediction. Einstein online also goes on to say theories of the deflection of light by mass date back at least to the late 18th century. At that time, John Michell and a English clergyman and natural philosopher in those days was a scientist. The term scientist didn't come until later. Reasoned that were the sun sufficiently massive, light could not escape from its surface. So he sort of cottoned on to the idea of the possibility of something like a black hole. So taking Newton as a starting point, those who came after him we can take as moving the goalposts from what Newton initially was saying. We take Newton as initially speculating that light is affected by gravity, and then people like coming after him start thinking, well, maybe light is affected by gravity, and thinking of it in the context of Newtonian physics. So it's a further development of Newtonian physics, but you can also look at it as adding more to Newtonian physics and moving on from what Newton was saying. Einstein online goes on to say the first calculation of the deflection of light by mass was published by Soldner in 1801. Soldner showed that rays from a distant star skimming the sun's surface would be deflected through an angle of about 0.9 seconds of arc. This angle corresponds to the apparent diameter of a compact disc, viewed from a distance of about 30 kilometers away. Soldner's calculations were based on Newton's laws of motion and gravitation, and the assumption that light behaves like very fast moving particles. As far as we know, neither Soldner nor later astronomers attempted to verify this prediction, and for good reason. Such an attempt would have been far beyond the capability of early 19th century astronomical instruments. So Soldner made this prediction based on extending Newtonian physics, and it was too small an effect to actually be measurable by what they had at the time. And Einstein online goes on to say, over a century later, in the early 20th century, Einstein developed his theory of general relativity. Einstein calculated that the deflection predicted by his theory would be twice the Newtonian value. So they're taking Soldner's value as the Newtonian value. So Thorne seems to be saying there's no deflection of light in Newtonian physics, and Hofner is saying there is. Thorne seems to be taking what Newton says about light bending as speculative by Newton and not definitive by Newton, then interprets as Newton predicts no light bending by gravity. So that's his take on what Newton is saying. Newton speculates that light bends under gravity, and Thorne doesn't think that's good enough, and so there's no Newtonian theory of light bending under gravity. And as for people that came later, such as Soldner, who worked on the idea, maybe Thorne dismisses that as moving goalpost, and I'll put a question mark on that because it's not really clear what Thorne's thinking process is. he seems to be dismissing what Newton says is speculative, and people who come later, maybe he's thinking it's moving goalposts. He doesn't want to consider what came later in the work on Newtonian physics after Newton, whereas Hofstadter will take these things into account and reach a different conclusion to Thorne. Thus we have two people saying two different things about a subject and then contradicting each other. And that shows you what a mess physics can be. Ideally, we would like to think that people can look at the facts and reach the same conclusions, but that is not what happens. People can reach contradictory conclusions, and this is still tying it into the idea of moving goalposts. So, in the case of Thorne versus Hofstadter, I conclude that Thorne is just wrong. He didn't want to consider the full complications involved in Newtonian physics. There is another complication. In special relativity, the conclusion stated by many people is that light is massless, i.e. particle has no mass, and a particle has no mass in the context of Newtonian physics would mean that it would be not bent by gravity. But first point, Newtonian physics itself does not say light has no mass. That is something being taken from another theory, namely special relativity. And the second point is people who interpret special relativity that way, light having no mass, I consider have just misunderstood that theory, and you need to see my videos like Rethinking Relativity. People have numerous false beliefs about relativity, which I've traced back to Einstein being mistranslated from German into English. So now on to the issue of moving goalposts. I have dealt with how goalposts are moved in Einstein's relativity in several of my talks. For example, see the talk Special Relativity, the pedagogical trick, at that address. In Einstein's 1905 paper on special relativity, there is no relativistic mass. That concept gets added later, and that is moving the goalposts. You're adding more to the theory. It's basically moving the goalposts. But then later, Don Lincoln thinks there is no relativistic mass, and so he wants the concept of relativistic mass removed. So you move the goalpost by adding relativistic mass, and Don Lincoln wants to move the goalposts again by taking the relativistic mass away. So you get an examples here of how Einstein's relativity has been changed, modified, added to, etc., and it's all just moving the goalpost. Now, for Newtonian physics, Soldner's light deflection calculation can be thought of as moving goalposts for Newtonian physics, where you can think of Newton as not really being clear enough about whether light is deflected by gravity, but then Soldner works upon that idea and takes the calculation based on moving the goalpost from what Newton was saying. But you can also go even further. If you've got Soldner's calculation and you find out it does not fit observation, then that just means there is an extra effect at work. So you can just add an extra effect by moving the goalpost yet again. So Newtonian physics can just keep moving the goalposts on it. You can just keep adding to it in the same way in which Einstein's relativity seems to have its goalposts keep moving. And if you look at the mainstream, they seem to allow moving goalposts in Einstein's relativity, and you should see my other talks dealing with that. But moving goalposts in Newtonian physics seems to be something the mainstream wants to ignore, i.e. they have an unfair bias in wanting to allow special favouritism for Einstein but not allow it for Newton. And so you can see the mess that moving goalposts make. If you can move the goalposts for Einstein's relativity, why are you not allowed to then move the goalposts for Newtonian physics? And what we get from all this is we get the example of the contradiction of Thorne and Hofstadter saying different things. When they state contradictory statements, part of the reason for that is because they're not being honest that they're moving the goalposts. Finn, that's it, thank you. So this is how the physics gets messed up. The theorists move the goalposts and they're not being clear about that's what they're doing. Presumably they don't properly understand that's what they're doing. Thank you.